Hello everyone, this is Mike from Library of Dyslexia. We're going to be picking up where we left off last time with the second meditation by Rene Descartes on his Meditations on First Philosophy. Should be a good one. The nature of the human mind and how it is better known than the body. So serious are the doubts into which I have been thrown as a result of yesterday's meditation that I can neither put them out of my mind nor see any way of resolving them. It feels as if I have fallen unexpectedly into a deep whirlpool which tumbles me around so that I can neither stand on the bottom nor swim up to the top. Nevertheless, I will make an effort and once more attempt the same path which I started on yesterday. Anything which admits of the slightest doubt I will set aside just as if I had found it to be wholly false, and I will proceed in this way until I recognize something certain, or if nothing else, until I at least recognize for certain that there is no certainty. Archimedes used to demand just one firm and immovable point in order to shift the entire earth. So I too can hope for great things if I manage to find just one thing, however slight, that is certain and unshakable. I will suppose then that everything I see is spurious. I will believe that my memory tells me lies, and that none of the things that it reports ever happened. I have no senses. Body, shape, extension, movement, and place are chimeras. So what remains true? Perhaps just the one fact that nothing is certain. Yet apart from everything I've just listed, how do I know that there is not something else which does not allow even the slightest occasion for doubt? Is there not a God, or whatever I may call him, who puts into me the thoughts I am now having? But why do I think this, since I myself may perhaps be the author of these thoughts? In that case, am not I at least something? But I've just said that I have no senses and no body. This is the sticking point. What follows from this? But I've convinced myself that there is absolutely nothing in the world, no sky, no earth, no minds, no bodies. Does it now follow that I too do not exist? No. If I convinced myself of something, then I certainly existed. But there is a deceiver of supreme power and cunning who is deliberately and constantly deceiving me. In that case, I too undoubtedly exist. If he is deceiving me, and let him deceive me as much as he can, he will never bring it about that I am nothing, so long as I think that I am something. So after considering everything very thoroughly, I must finally conclude that this proposition, I exist, is necessarily true whenever it is put forward by me or conceived in my mind. But I do not yet have sufficient understanding of what this I is that now necessarily exists. So I must be on my guard against carelessly taking something else to be this I, and so making a mistake in this very item of knowledge that I maintain is the most certain and evident of all. I will therefore go back and meditate on what I originally believed myself to be before I embarked on this present train of thought. I will then subtract anything capable of being weakened, even minimally, by the arguments now introduced, so that what is left at the end may be exactly and only what is certain and unshakable. What then did I formerly think I was? A man? But what is a man? Shall I say a rational animal? No, for then I should have to inquire what an animal is, what rationality is, and in this one question would lead me down the slope to other harder ones, and I do not now have the time to waste on subtleties of this kind. Instead, I propose to concentrate on what came into my thoughts spontaneously and quite naturally whenever I used to consider what I was. Well, the first thought to come to mind is that I had a face, hands, arms, and the whole mechanical structure of limbs which can be seen in a corpse, and which I called the body. The next thought was that I was nourished, that I moved about, and that I engaged in sense perception and thinking, and these actions I attributed to the soul. But as to the nature of this soul, either I did not think about this, or else I imagined it to be something tenuous, like wind or fire or ether, which permeated my more solid parts. As to the body, however, I had no doubts about it, but I thought I knew its nature distinctly. If I tried to describe the mental conception I had of it, I would have expressed it as follows. By a body, I understand whatever has a determinable shape and definable location, and can occupy a space in such a way as to exclude any other body. It can be perceived by touch, sight, hearing, taste, or smell, and can be moved in various ways, not by itself, but by whatever else comes into contact with it. For according to my judgment, the power of self-movement, like the power of sensation or of thought, was quite foreign to the nature of the body. Indeed, it was a source of wonder to me that certain bodies were found to contain faculties of this kind. But what shall I now say that I am, when I am supposing that there is some supremely powerful and, if it is permissible for me to say so, malicious deceiver, who is deliberately trying to trick me in every way he can I now assert that I possess even the most insignificant of all these attributes, which I have just said belong to the nature of the body. I scrutinize them, think about them, go over them again, but nothing suggests itself. It is tiresome and pointless to go through this list once more. But what about the attributes I assign to the soul? Nutrition or movement? Since now I do not have a body, these are mere fabrications. Sense, perception? This surely does not occur without a body. And, besides, when asleep I have perceived through the senses many things which I afterwards realized I did not perceive through the senses at all. Thinking? At last I have discovered it. Thought. This alone is inseparable from me. I am. I exist. That is certain. But for how long? For as long as I am thinking. For it could be that I were totally to cease from thinking, I should totally cease to exist. At present, I am not admitting anything except what is necessarily true. I am then, in this strict sense, only a thing that thinks. That is, I am a mind, or intelligence, or intellect, or reason, words whose meaning I have been ignorant of until now. But for all that, I am a thing which is real and which truly exists. But what kind of a thing? As I've just said, a thinking thing. What else am I? I will use my imagination. I'm not that structure of limbs which is called a human body. I'm not even some thin vapor which permeates the limbs, a wind, fire, air, breath, or whatever depiction in my imagination. For these are things which I have supposed to be nothing. Let this supposition stand. For all that I am still something, and yet it may not perhaps be the case that these very things which I am supposing to be nothing, because they are unknown to me, are in reality identical with the I which I am aware. I do not know, and for the moment shall not argue the point, since I can make judgments only about the things which are known to me. I know that I exist. The question is, what is this I that I know? If the I is understood strictly as we have been taking it, then it is quite certain that knowledge of it does not depend on things of whose existence I am as yet unaware. So it cannot depend on any things which I invent in my imagination. And this very word invent shows me my mistake. It would indeed be a case of fictitious invention if I used my imagination to establish that I was something or other, for imagining is simply contemplating the shape or image of a corporeal thing. Yet now I know for certain both that I exist and at the same time that all such images, and in general everything relating to the nature of the body, could be mere dreams and chimeras. Once this point has been grasped, to say I will use my imagination to get to know more distinctly what I am, would seem to be as silly as saying I am now awake and see some truth, but since my vision is not yet clear enough, I will deliberately fall asleep so that my dreams may provide a truer and clearer representation. I thus realize that none of the things that the imagination enables me to grasp is at all relevant to this knowledge of myself which I possess, and that the mind must therefore be carefully diverted from such things if it is to perceive its own nature as distinctly as possible. But what then am I? A thing that thinks, what is that? A thing that doubts, understands, affirms, denies, is willing, is unwilling, and also imagines and has sensory perceptions. This is a considerable list. If everything on it belongs to me, but does it? Is it not one and the same who is now doubting almost everything, who nonetheless understands some things, who affirms that this one thing is true, denies everything else, desires to know more, is unwilling to be deceived, imagines many things involuntarily, and is aware of many things which apparently come from the senses? Are not all these things just as true as the fact that I exist? Even if I am asleep all the time, even if he who created me is doing all he can to deceive me? Which of all these activities is distinct from my thinking? Which of them can be said to be separate from myself? The fact that it is I who am doubting and understanding and willing is so evident that I see no way of making it any clearer. But it is also the case that the I who imagines is the same I. For even if, as I have supposed, none of the objects of my imagination are real, the power of imagination is something which really exists and is part of my thinking. Lastly, it is also the same I who has sensory perceptions, or is aware of bodily things as it were through the senses. For example, I am now seeing light, hearing a noise, feeling heat, but I am asleep, so all of this is false. Yet I certainly seem to hear, see, and to be warmed. This cannot be false. What is called having a sensory perception is strictly just this, and in this restricted sense of the term, it is simply thinking. From all this, I'm beginning to have a rather better understanding of what I am, but it still appears, and I cannot stop thinking this, that the corporeal things of which images are formed in my thought, and which the senses investigate, are known with much more distinctness than this puzzling I, which cannot be pictured in the imagination. And yet it is surely surprising that I should have a more distinct grasp of things which I realize are doubtful, unknown, and foreign to me, than I have of that which is true and known, my own self. But I see what it is. My mind enjoys wandering off and will not yet submit to being restrained within the bounds of truth. Very well then. Just this once, let us give it a completely free rein, so that after a while, when it is time to tighten the reins, it may more readily submit to being curbed. Let us consider the things which people commonly think they understand most distinctly of all, that is, the bodies which we touch and see. I do not mean bodies in general, for general perceptions are apt to be somewhat more confused. But one particular body, let us take for example this piece of wax. It has just been taken from the honeycomb. It has not yet quite lost the taste of honey. It retains some of the scent of the flowers from which it was gathered. Its color, shape, and size are plain to see. It is hard, cold, and can be handled without difficulty. If you rap it with your knuckle, it makes a sound. In short, it has everything which appears necessary to enable a body to be known as distinctly as possible. But, even as I speak, I put the wax by the fire and look. The residual taste is eliminated, the smell goes away, the color changes, the shape is lost, the size increases, it becomes liquid and hot, you can hardly touch it, and if you strike it, it no longer makes a sound. But does the same wax remain? It must be admitted that it does. No one denies it, no one thinks otherwise. So what was it in the wax that I understood with such distinctness? Evidently none of the features which I arrived at by means of the senses, for whatever came under taste, smell, sight, touch, or hearing has not altered, yet the wax remains. Perhaps the answer lies in the thought which now comes to mind, namely, the wax was not after all the sweetness of the honey, or the fragrance of the flowers, or the whiteness, or the shape, or the sound, but was rather a body which presented itself to me in these various forms a little while ago, but which now exhibits different ones. What exactly is it that I am now imagining? Let us concentrate, take away everything which does not belong to the wax, and see what is left. Merely something extended, flexible, and changeable. But what is meant here by flexible and changeable? Is it what I picture in my imagination, that this piece of wax is capable of changing from a round shape to a square shape, or from a square shape to a triangular shape? Not at all. For I can grasp that the wax is capable of countless changes of this kind, yet I am unable to run through this immeasurable number of changes in my imagination, from which it follows that it is not the faculty of imagination that gives me my grasp of the wax as flexible and changeable. And what is meant by extended? Is the extension of wax also unknown? For it increases if the wax melts, increases again if it boils, and is greater still if the heat is increased. I would not be making a correct judgment about the nature of wax unless I believed it capable of being extended in many more difficult ways than I will ever encompass in my imagination. I must therefore admit that the nature of this piece of wax is in no way revealed by my imagination, but is perceived by the mind alone. I'm speaking of this particular piece of wax. The point is even clearer with regard to wax in general. But what is this wax which is perceived by the mind alone? It is of course the same wax which I see, which I touch, which is the picture in my imagination. In short, the same wax which I thought it to be from the start. And yet, and here is the point, the perception I have of it is a case not of vision or touch or imagination, nor has it ever been despite previous appearances, but of purely mental scrutiny, and this can be imperfect and confused, as it was before, or clear and distinct as it is now, depending on how carefully I concentrate on what the wax consists in. But as I reach this conclusion, I'm amazed about how weak and prone to error my mind is, for although I am thinking about these matters within myself silently and without speaking, nonetheless the actual words bring me up short, and I am almost tricked by ordinary ways of talking. We say that we see the wax itself, if it is therefore before us, not that we judge it to be there from its color or shape, and this might lead me to conclude without more ado that knowledge of the wax comes from what the eyes see, and not from the scrutiny of the mind alone. But then if I look at the window and see men crossing the square, as I just happen to have done, I normally say that I see the men themselves, just as I say that I see the wax. Yet do I see any more than hats and coats which could conceal automatons? I judge that they are men, and so something which I thought was seeing with my eyes is in fact grasped solely by the faculty of judgment which is in my mind. However, one who wants to achieve knowledge above the ordinary level should feel ashamed at having taken ordinary ways of talking as a basis for doubt. So let us proceed and consider on which occasion my perception of the nature of the wax was more perfect and evident. Was it when I first looked at it and believed I knew it by my external senses, or at least by what they call the common sense, that is, the power of imagination? Or is my knowledge more perfect now after more careful investigation of the nature of the wax and of the means by which it is known? Any doubt on this issue would clearly be foolish, for what distinctness was there in my earlier perception? Was there anything in it which an animal could not possess? But when I distinguish the wax from its outward forms, take the clothes off, as it were, and consider it naked, then, although my judgment may still contain errors, at least my perception now requires a human mind. But what am I to say about this mind, or about myself? So far, remember, I am not admitting that there is anything else in me except a mind. What, I ask, is this I, which seems to perceive the wax so distinctly? Surely my awareness of my own self is not merely much truer and more certain than my awareness of the wax, but also much more distinct and evident. For if I judge that the wax exists from the fact that I see it clearly, the same fact entails much more evidently that I myself also exist. It is possible that what I see is not really the wax. It is possible that I do not even have eyes with which to see anything. But when I see or think I see, I am not here distinguishing the two. It is simply not possible that I, who am now thinking, am not something. By the same token, if I judge the wax exists from the fact that I touch it, the same results follow, namely that I exist. If I judge that it exists from the fact that I imagine it, or for any other reason, exactly the same thing follows, and the result that I've grasped in the case of the wax may be applied to everything else located outside me. Moreover, if my perception of the wax seemed distinct after it was established not just by sight or touch, but by many other considerations, it must be admitted that I now know myself even more distinctly. This is because every consideration whatsoever which contributes to my perception of the wax or of any other body cannot but establish even more effectively the nature of my own mind. But besides this, there is so much else in the mind itself which can serve to make my knowledge of it more distinct, that it scarcely seems worth going through in the contributions made by considering bodily things. I see that without any effort, I have now finally got back to where I wanted. I now know that even bodies are not strictly perceived by the senses or the faculty of imagination, but by the intellect alone, and that this perception derives not from their being touched or seen, but from their being understood. And in view of this, I know plainly that I can achieve an easier and more evident perception of my own mind than of anything else. But since the habit of holding on to old opinions cannot be set aside so quickly, I should like to stop here and meditate for some time on this new knowledge I've gained, so as to fix it more deeply in my memory. That's it. That is the second meditation. Anyways, if you guys have any questions, feel free to send an email to the library of dyslexia@gmail.com. We'd be happy to get back to you. And thank you for listening. You have a fantastic day. Any doubt on this issue would clearly be foolish. For what distinctness was there in my earlier perception? Was there anything in which an animal... Who knows about animals? I don't know about animals. I wasn't there, don't ask me. I wasn't there, don't ask me. Who knows about animals? I don't know about animals. La da 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 da. La da 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 da. Cannot but establish. Cannot but establish. Who knows about animals? I don't know about animals. Who knows about animals? I don't know about animals. Who knows about animals? I don't know about animals. I wasn't there, don't ask me.